you want to go with some introductions and then we'll see how things kind of roll?
Yeah, let's do that.
Sure, that sounds good.
Ladies first.
I'm Nimsha
choice.
Believer. I am retired and I'm the legend of the Macavia. I was involved with field hockey.
Outstanding. John, you want me to go?
Sure.
Okay. Sean Frazier, I'm the Director of Athletics here at Northern Illinois University. I've been in at NIU for just over 7 years now, finishing up my 8th year. Before that, coming from University of Wisconsin-Madison for about 6.5. Been in higher ed for a long time, been in athletics for about 30 years. Been a professor dealing with issues of multicultural student affairs, as well as diversity and inclusion throughout my career. And right now, dealing with the racial reckoning that we're currently dealing with social action, social justice, and more importantly, a student athlete's voice around these particular issues. So that's me. Thank you.
Great. I'm John Pointer. I can tell you currently right now, I'm assisting former NFL players who are very interested in getting into small business development. This is due to the fact that we're in a pandemic crisis, and right now it's documented by the federal government that that previously in 2019, there were 11 million minority small business owners. Currently, right now, there's a loss of close to 45%. My point is that minority businesses, as well as other small, mid-sized, micro businesses, can offer goods and services to the federal government, to state government agencies, such as universities, to Fortune 500 companies. And no matter what, we're going to continue in 2021, they will continue to purchase their goods and services. So there's a void right now. And I feel currently that former NFL players could help fill that void. And we'll discuss later as far as some of their capabilities. Should we talk about, I guess, especially Sean, you're implementing some of these programs at universities right now, at the university that you're on. Should we talk about where we are today with some of these issues? What do you think?
Eugene just came on. Why don't he introduce himself to us?
Yes.
Oh yeah, that's right. Hi, Eugene.
Can you hear me?
Now we can.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. I don't know why I can't get the video going. But I wanted to start you folks from a little further back, now that you've gotten through your intros. Each one of you, I don't know where Mim is from, but I know that one of you went to college in Alabama in the late 80s. One of you went to college in Nashville in the late 1970s, early 1980s. And before you get into current, can you give us a look for each one of you? Can you talk for a couple of minutes each about, what you went through in college on this subject? Couldn't have been easy in Nashville, and I was in Alabama in the late 80s, and I have a good idea what it was like there.
So John,
I went to college in the early to mid 70s. I was the only Black on my field hockey team. And I went to school in New Jersey.
Okay. Do you want me to start? I'm the
Yeah,
guy.
I'm sorry. I finally just got video, so now I can see you.
Okay. Yeah, so that's me. My family is from Birmingham, in Gaston, Alabama. I'm actually, though, I grew up in Queens in Long Island, New York. So you'll hear that in my voice. You could probably hear that. So, but how I got to Alabama was obviously the opportunity to play football and also to reunite with my extended family, which was again Gaston, Birmingham. Yeah, very different. Very different. It was cultural shock for me, being going from a majority scenario where I was in the school systems to going down to Alabama and dealing with some of the issues up front. I think the biggest thing that was telling for me is that my mother had gone to Tuskegee Institute and could not go to University of Alabama based on the racial issues and challenges associated with that. So my ability to have access to higher education, which was huge, and then the ability to be on that college campus with some of the civil rights battles of our time, and obviously for the integration of the University of Alabama. I think the stark issues there for me were the fact that the Ku Klux Klan and various other groups were there. But what sport provided was this kind of canceling effect where, because I was on the football team, because I was part of the athletic department, I didn't see that face. But there was stark issues. We had a black fraternity row and we had a white fraternity row. So there was a conscious messaging around me growing up of, quite frankly, of understanding that there's differences and that the racial struggle was very evident all around me. Even though growing up in New York, it wasn't about that. It was black and brown, Latino folks that, quite frankly, that it was easy for me to deal with and understand because we were all together in that. So that was an interesting situation, so to speak. But I'll stop there, and maybe John and then you guys can kind of chime in from there.
Well, I grew up in South Jersey, and we have a saying that it's as far south as you can get. I grew up in Bridgeton, New Jersey, which is below the Mason-Dixon line. If you go due west, you hit Baltimore, Maryland. It was a very segregated area. I went to a segregated elementary school. And when I went to junior high, my mother, who was a teacher in the junior high, forced them to put me in college prep, where I was only one of 3 Black students coming from an all Black elementary school. So that was a culture shock for me. And then I went to college with 15,000 students and only 1,500 were Black. I don't know how many were Latino. My roommate was Latino. But I grew up in, my 5th grade teacher was a Klansman. So that's what I come from. And one of the things I did notice was growing up in Bridgeton, I mean, this is going to sound terrible, but I knew where I could go. I knew where I shouldn't go. I knew what I could do. I knew what I couldn't do. But when I went up to North Jersey, and I was so excited because, we're not going to have any racism when I get up to North Jersey, it was there. It was just undercover. But the same feelings. You just didn't know where you could go and what you could do until it was too late.
And then which college in Jersey did you go to?
Montclair State. It's a university now. It was a college then.
I know Montclair State well. I'm actually the son of my father taught at Rutgers from 1946 until 1992. And we were very involved and knowledgeable about all of the campuses because of him.
Mm-hmm. Another thing about me is I'm also Jewish. So, I get the whammy from both sides. And being a female athlete, I'm straight. That's another whammy.
Well, born and raised 60 miles south from Nashville. Grew up in the 60s, a 60s child. Witnessed the Civil Rights Act, not only on nationwide TV, but saw it in my hometown. with my mom, who's less than 10 feet from me right now. She was a school teacher for over 40 years. She taught during the segregation and also taught after integration. She taught English. Just as Sean, she had to attend Tennessee State University to get her undergrad, and she got her master's at Kentucky State, both HBCUs. I cherish the fact that one of my best sports environments was watching the Cleveland Black Summit. It consisted of Jim Brown, Lou Alcindor, who eventually changed his name to Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, Cassius Clay, who also conformed his name into Muhammad Ali, and many other top stars during that era. I thought that was one of the best things that ever happened to me, to see these professional gentlemen in business suits articulating about economic growth and development back then in the late 60s. I finished as the #1 linebacker in the state of Tennessee. Right after Bear Bryant said, we want to make sure that our players stay within this area. I was recruited by all the universities in the South, SEC being the leader, but had a chance to go to Penn State, Notre Dame, University of Iowa, and I chose Vanderbilt. I chose Vanderbilt for its education. I chose Vanderbilt for the closeness. I chose Vanderbilt for life after being a student athlete. Did I witness direct racism? Yes, you bet I did. One of the things that I remember is plain as day on Vanderbilt's campus as a freshman. There was an anti-apartheid march, demonstration. Blacks and whites were marching in front of the gymnasium. And we had just finished, it was summer, late, it was fall time, just before the season. And we were walking for dinner, walking to the dormitory for dinner. And a couple of my African-American ball players went over there and got in the march. Well, of course, we were picking on them, but it impressed me so much. It impressed me that they've just decided, this is something that I've got to do. I've got to be a part of this march. And it triggered something in my mindset about standing up and standing out. So to tell you, I went on, I was a free agent in Cincinnati, did not make it. Forrest Gregg kept an eye on me. I went to Canada. When I say Forrest Gregg, the legendary Forrest Gregg, the NFL Hall of Famer, head football coach of Cincinnati Bengals. Then he became the head coach of the Green Bay Packers. So I had good seasons up there in the CFL, 81 through 86. Had a chance to come to Green Bay because of Forrest Gregg. And in and around that time, I felt it was a time for me to get started in my small business interest. And that small business interest turned out to be in the petroleum distribution business. I started a business in Nashville. I received the United States Congressional Proclamation as the top-rated minority businessman of the year. It accrued several millions in government contracts. Unfortunately, the U.S. Small Business Administration certified lender was a crook. He was a Bernie Madoff type of guy. And I had to initiate a federal whistleblowing action against this guy. I had to initiate contacting the FBI, Department of Justice, you name it, any and everybody. So that put me on the path of being an activist. And that was in the eras of late 80s all the way through to current day. But in a 5-year span from the late 80s till the mid 90s, I was active with the federal government in stopping criminal fraud and abuse in women and minority business loan programs that are currently still offered by the U.S. Small Business Administration. So they hadn't gotten their act right yet. Minority small business owners are the least ones that have received the PPP loans. I'll be quiet.
Let me take it forward. It's 2020. National consciousness did not start in the spring in Minneapolis. It started a long time ago. So perhaps each one of you could talk a little bit more about, the last 3 or 4 years. In Sean's case, you've been in the same place for several years. You're an assistant vice president at NIU. John, you've done some great things and have received some awards in Nashville. Mim, I know Maccabee quite well, and you're doing some fine things at Maccabee. Can you each talk about your experiences when you look about how you're treated and about how the people you work with are treated when it comes to this topic of racism? And perhaps Sean can start.
Okay, no problem. Yeah, good question, powerful question. I'm quite sure our life stories are important, especially to get a bit of context about what's going on. Yeah, the numbers are telling, right? So for me, being in this space as long as I have, I'm really humbled to do that. This on the FBS level, that's the division level, Division I level. There's a number of inequities around folks of color, especially women of color, that hold the director of athletics position. Not proud of the numbers, but I believe I'm 13 to 14 of only having African Americans, 13 to 14 out of 130 positions at the FBS level. So that gives you a little bit of a context. How I'm treated, to ask the question, is that I've been fortunate to have a president who's a woman, who's fantastic in her leadership ability to recognize talent and to promote diversity and inclusion. So in my current role, I feel really comfortable about where the direction of the university is going, as well as the overall cultural components around of me being a leader on campus. I think the biggest issue for me has really been more about throwing the rope back over the proverbial fence to help others to be in my role, where I've got a lot of young people who are aspiring director of athletics, entry-level positions, coaches, et cetera, who are looking to be in this career track. And the stark reality is that they're going to have significant barriers or challenges associated with that because of the numbers. These are good jobs. Folks want them. Folks compete for them. But at the same time, when you're looking at participation rates, especially of African Americans at the football and basketball level, we're seeing significant amount of representation. But we're not seeing representation at the leadership level, both in coaching as well as director of athletics. So there's a conundrum. That's the big pink elephant in the room, is that we have lots of representation at the football and men's and women's basketball, but we're not seeing representation at the coaching and director of athletics. So why is that? Well, people can extrapolate the reasons why, but the biggest issue is having access and opportunities and having leaders like my current president and others who have, quite frankly, supported leadership for women and ethnic racial minorities to sit in this role. Again, it's a top-down approach. I think that as we kind of work further with some of these things, we do these things to make sure that that we are supporting diversity and inclusion, but it's also human rights. It's issues of that. So I'll stop there. Don't want to hog the line, but again, it's about the top-down approach and the access and opportunities for folks that generally don't have that opportunity but need that support.
Mim?
Well, as far as opportunities, for 20 years, I owned a coaching business. and with field hockey. And field hockey is basically a white elite sport, so there are very few minorities in it. I worked on bringing field hockey to the inner city, to New York City, to Newark, and some of the other primarily minority areas, so that we could get more minorities into field hockey. I'm one of the few minorities to go as far as I did in U.S. field hockey. I did concentrate a lot on having minority students that played for me so that they could get the opportunity to go to college and, you know, perhaps get a partial scholarship. They don't really give full ones anymore, but, you know, partial scholarship to have the opportunity to go to college so that they could become administrators or whatever.
And
Right.
John, do you want to?
Yeah, let me tell you, as far as current day, where we are, based with a little mixture of my life experiences. I can tell you currently with the issues that we're addressing now, they've been here for decades, centuries, and I think the way that we have to approach them is to have these types of outward conversations about it. And let me tell you, I mentioned the fact that yes, I was a petroleum distribution owner of my own company here in Tennessee. But if you know your American history, you know anything about African American whistleblowers and the retaliation factors, everything that you're seeing about Donald Trump and Mike Pence talking about their White House theory that they're going to have they've got a V shape. That's the life of a whistleblower. Number one rated minority business here in the South. Had a chance to testify in Washington on several occasions, identified as a true American patriot, an American hero. You go bankrupt, you have foreclosures of your own, you have decades of bad credits. And doing this travel, this journey that I'm on, and all the time asking God, why me? But in reflection, there was a point in time that I had to answer, why not me? You know, you always think, come on, group, hey, we need to fight this thing. We need to handle this thing. When it's all said and done, you're the sole identity of your actions. And I learned that, you know, in my early professional career, that I have to stand up and stand proud of the things that I identified. Well, during my journey, my spiral down, and it was don't get me wrong, I enjoyed it. I had a chance to become the assistant to the commissioner of the Ohio Valley Conference. It was only $11,000 NCAA grant, but I got along with Dan Beebe. Sean, I know you know Dan very well. Mim, you probably know him also. He came from the NCAA investigations of Oklahoma in the 70s, Sean. Dan was the commissioner of the OVC. Also had a chance to be the assistant athletics director for Middle Tennessee State University in fundraising in athletics there for a few years. Had a chance to be an English teacher, inner city high school. And we made lemons. My wife and my family and I, we made lemons out of lemonade. We, career-wise, going this way, I was once identified by the senior human resources of the Nashville airport. She called me 3 days before Christmas. She said, John, after 2 months of interviews with all these candidates, congratulations, you're our new vice president of the Nashville airport. in less than 24 hours, the CEO of the Nashville Airport Authority called me and said, "Hey, John, I didn't know you had all this in your background. Hey, I am reneging on the offer. Forget you ever got that call yesterday. Have a nice Christmas. Merry Christmas." So been there, done that. Racial threats, death threats, um, bad financial situations for decades. But there's a God, and you have to pull yourself up by your bootstraps and keep on going. And I went on from being a whistleblower to a major multi-million-dollar criminal scandal to, for decades now, I've been identifying waste, fraud, and abuse, especially in programs that greatly affect women, minority, LGBTQ, and military veterans and disabled military veterans, small business programs. I've identified billions of dollars of fraud and abuse here in Tennessee. My point of concern when I've testified in a few occasions in Washington, there has to be better oversight. Whether we're for President Trump or Vice President Joe Biden, policy has to change. And and I'm proud to be beside me these two athletic professionals who are in the administrative part of it. And I can only ditto the fact that there's got to be policy changes. We've got our African American athletes making billions of dollars for these universities. And we don't have that many Sean Fraziers, and we don't have that many Miss Mims out there in the administrative controlling those funds for these universities and in professional athletic professional organizations such as MIM has. And this is why I'm here today live to tell all these young people out there that are watching, you have to do this. It's your generation that could come to the table and say, we want policy change, not just change right on and go home and feel good about it. You've got to have policy changes. Unless there's oversight, then we're just fussing and cussing. That's all we're doing.
I'm wondering if we're just spinning our wheels sometimes, because I mean, I remember having these same conversations in the 70s, in the 80s, in the 90s, in the 2000s. And I don't know if we're making change fast enough for some of these young people. They want everything yesterday. With the technology that we have today, we're seeing a lot more than what we saw, than what we were able to see, visually see in the, the 70s to the 90s. You couldn't see it. So was it really true? Was it really happening? But with our technology today, I think we have the ability to make these policy changes faster, to step up the rate, because, like, how much change has really happened since, the 70s? I mean, the 50s, yeah, we're seeing more and more minorities in executive positions, more and more women in executive positions. But based on our numbers, the percentages of minorities and women that are in executive positions is still very tiny. It's a tiny percentage. 2, 3, I'll give it 10%. And I think that's being quite generous. And I would love to figure out a way for young people to embrace the fact that it does take time to make these changes. And how do we do that? How do we impress upon them that you have to keep chipping away? You just have to keep working at it, chipping at it, so that we do make these changes, which, you know, in my business, I not only taught field hockey skills, I taught life skills because I wanted these girls and boys to go make something of themselves and bring other people with them, you know, to pay it forward. So how do we make these changes faster? How do we change policy faster? How do we change attitudes faster? Because I think that's how we're going to inspire these young kids, these young people, men and women, to stay the fight the good fight.
Right, right. Ma'am, look at where we are today. Look at how we're voting. Isn't that atrocious? We're one of the the best technology countries in the world, and we've got millions of people wrapped around buildings and out in the roads voting in inclement weather. I mean, that is absolutely ridiculous. We've got to take the monies out of politics. The with the elite, there's an elitist status that controls both political situations. And I'm not here to talk about politics.
Don't get me started on
There's an elitist status. There's the government. Then there's the mindset that this Democrat Party does this and this Republican Party does that, and it keeps things in a fray. But business is still being done. Universities are still making monies off of student athletes. Professional leagues are still doing very well with the professional athletes. The media is making monies off of men and women of color who are athletes. And we've got to make sure, especially these beautiful people that are here viewing these conversations, you've got to be about the ideology. Where's the diversity? Where's the opportunity for inclusiveness? You know, we may have said a little bit these last 3 years.
John, I want to cut in because you just said something very important, and I want to see if we can get an opinion from Sean. There's been a recent change in the NCAA about allowing student athletes to make money from their image and name. And I'm curious, Sean, you're in that world. You're a director at a university of athletics. Does that rule change have an opportunity to potentially allow some minorities to come forward faster?
I think that's it's another way to talk about their brand and their ability to generate money. And I would say that is a step in the right direction. It's been a long time. You and I played, I'm quite sure, John, when you played, the same thing with you, ma'am, is that the ability, the restrictions around using your brand or your identity to generate dollars was only good for a scholarship. Now the name, image, and likeness gives you an opportunity to monetize your individual brand. And that's riddled with a number of challenges, right? I'm definitely for individuals who can monetize their ability to make money individually, not necessarily co-branding with the institution. So me, the Alabama football player versus just me, you know what I'm saying, separating those. So that legislation is ongoing. We're finalizing pieces to that. Definitely, I believe it needs to be a federal mandate, not an individual state mandate, as far as different states having different laws associated with what people could do. So what happens in Illinois is different than what happens in Florida, what happens in Tennessee. But I would say that it will help because as you take a look at the scholarship and what it pays and what it actually deals with, a lot of us, even with a full scholarship, still could not have the finances to be able to live life, you know, food, rent, washing your clothes, etc. I think the bigger issue, to answer your question though, is that the access, the ability, we have a critical mass of very qualified women and ethnic racial minorities that are looking for careers, looking for leadership roles, looking to be a part of the decision-making process to help. So that critical mass is sitting there and are having these conversations. Well, I could be making a lot more in the private sector if I do X, Y, and Z. Why would I want to pursue a career in athletics administration where there's not enough access, there's not enough opportunities for that? So we're starting to see now the racial reckoning of conversations with young people that are saying it's time now. I no longer want to be in the shadows. I want to have my voice, and not just people of color, but the majority as well. A number of my student athletes as well, who are not Black and brown, are basically saying it's enough. We've got to stop this. We've got to make sure we have access and opportunity for all. So some of this is, okay, the overt racism that we just kind of talked about, and some of this is about the human rights issue, about the fact that, it's no longer acceptable because of someone's color, background, culture, sexual orientation, etc. All the protected classes to demean, to put down, and that, quite frankly, not provide access. So I think that that's what we're seeing right now. And I think throughout the NCAA and member institutions like mine, if you have not demonstrated leadership and an awareness and a consciousness that these issues are real, you're going to be in trouble. And you're not going to be able to lead within an organization like that, because the students and our young folks are demanding leadership at that level. And we're seeing that all across the country. I think a lot of folks are hoping that it just kind of goes away, but it's not going away. It's here. And I think that what we've got to do now is band together and be connectors. Engage in the level of discourse that talks about how do we move us forward collectively, despite race, gender, sexual orientation. They should be a part of the norm. This is what we do normally. This is who we are as a society. And I think that right now, a lot of us are struggling in different organizations, and just like in higher ed, where how do we provide that pathway so people can see themselves as a part of the decision-making process and not an outsider to the very thing that they are participating in.
How is the NCAA rule change going to affect Title IX and women? At the D1 level, very few women's sports make money. It's football, basketball. If the big organizations, the Nikes and the Reeboks and whatever, Adidas, start supporting individual athletes instead of pouring that money into athletic programs, how is that going to affect women's sports? Because we don't make the money that the men's sports do. You have a few D1 schools which are powerhouses, but they still don't make the money like football and basketball. So how will this rule change affect women in sports, women's athletics?
Yeah, I think that's a longer conversation, but I will tell you that that's definitely a very good conversation, because the impacts of how that is dealt with, our financial model is clear, especially at the Power 5 at the Thomas 5 level, even at my level, at the Group of 5 level, where the revenue producing sports are men, let's just call it what it is. And they are funding to some degree a significant a part of women's sports and the Olympic sports, quite frankly. And we're seeing an unintended consequence of that it could be a shortening of dollars toward the athletic department, henceforth the sport offerings. Those are things that could happen. It's not, we're seeing a lot of folks right now with the COVID that institutions are choosing to cut sports, cut offerings. And some of them are men and some of them are women. But as we're taking a look at the financial resources being limited because of enrollment trends and other things, we're starting to see a downsizing of the Olympic sports in particular, and more of a concentration on sports that, quite frankly, that can be monetized. So again, this is another unintended consequence of evolving times. And I would agree with you, ma'am. I think that there will be a consequence, and reason why a number of organizations that support student athletes' rights and others are pushing back, because they're seeing the crystal ball, and it basically looks like a reduction in sport offerings more so than a broadening of sport offerings. So yeah, these are things that will take effect, as well as what's happening with COVID-19 and some of the things in higher ed. So it's a good question, good discussion point.
So I'm going to ask you one more question, and then I'm going to hope that some people in the room start typing questions into the chat box for us. But one more question. It's 2020. There are changes being made. I mean, I'm part of the funding community and the investment capital community. I see venture firms starting up with targeting specifically minority startups, targeting female-led startups. There's a group in Israel called We Women, and they've got $1 billion a year, and they only fund female-led startups in the Middle East. And that can be both in Israel as well as some of the Arab countries. Matter of fact, a lot of projects I'm involved with include Palestinians and Israelis in trying to get that going forward. And there must be women on the team. In many cases, there must be an Ethiopian, a black Israeli Jew on the team. So here's the question here. It's 2020. If you could pick one thing, one major problem that could be solved in the next 2 years, and let's leave politics out of it, what would that one thing be that would make our culture move forward leap years? And well, I'm looking at perhaps John could speak to this for a couple of minutes, and then Sean and Min.
Eugene, let me step backwards just a little bit of what you were talking about. Some of this money that's pouring in right now. It's well and good, and yes, I've been monitoring it. But right now, the real intent is about the fact that it's going towards more high tech, more housing development, and we're not making sure that it meets the needs of modern day society. Yes, we have to change our ways, change voting locations and the machinery of the voting process. But by the same token, the small micro businessmen and businesswomen, women, they have to have opportunities to first have the accessibilities of the funds and then grow. I don't care if it's a cafeteria. I don't care if it's a mining company. I don't care if it's an auto detailing companies. These are necessities. I don't care if it's human resources, part-time for the American Airlines. These are the types of resources that all of these big announced funds have to articulate down to the very lowest ebb in society to make sure that we don't continue to create the have and the have-nots. All these wonderful people, again, all you wonderful people that are out there viewing this, you have to participate in the fact that if you want universities and the NCAA to change, you have to notify them through your monies, your contributions, and the ongoing written word. The same thing, and I'm not making this government, but the same thing with our politicians. And then you have to do it with the Nikes, the Adidas, the Reeboks. Let them know, hey, why can't we have a distribution warehouse in the inner cities? Why can't we have an investor owner who's a professional athlete and it's an African American or a female star athlete? Why can't he or she, sort of like franchisor and franchisee, why can't they have some outshoots of business evolvements? Major businesses evolve all the time. They have different brothers, sisters out there affiliated with their major corporations. We need to do it in the sporting world also. Eugene, you there? Sean, you want to talk? Mem, you want to talk?
Yeah.
I can continue, but I don't want to take up all the space.
I think the question, you know, if I could just recap, is the fact that, you know, from the access point, I have to go back to access, because I think at the end of the day, you know, in the diversity and inclusion space, you know, I think that the real issue and the call to action for all of our young people, all of our students, quite frankly, is the cry to say, okay, we're ready. We're ready to have these opportunities. But how can we get there based on some systemic issues that are clearly against this particular protected class? And for me, as an African American who's been in the role and has been the only one around the table at a number of institutions, it's the same conversation, kind of going back to what Mim said. We've been talking about this for a while. And I think the frustration level is finally at a level where it's kind of bled into the majority, because what I'm starting to see now is I'm not necessarily seeing a lot of folks, Black and brown, that are coming to me mainly because of what we do at NIU. I'll stick my chest out about that. But I'm also starting to see the majority saying, well, why can't, it's time. And then we're starting to see the various action items around social justice, the marches, and the other types of things that are just completely, a lot of them have to be frustrated by, why can't we move this agenda? My brother is a police officer. My father was a police officer. For me to believe that we should defund the police, or believe that's part of the issue, that's one of the many issues. So as I talk to my brother as a Black police officer outside of Boston, he's talking about how folks are talking about, okay, we need to defund this and do that. But I'm looking at him. If I didn't have him to protect me, the issues, it's not about the color of him or the issues. There's always gonna be bad apples or what have you that are in the bunch, but we need to talk about the larger systemic issue. It's not just that. So for me, my lens is colored a little differently when it comes to police officers because of my background as a Black man. But understanding, have I been dealt with abuses around that? Yeah, I have. And so has he. But the issue now becomes, how do we get access? How do we start to get and regain the power? And how do we start acting on principles that are part of the components of citizenship for our society? Human rights, that's the issue. And a lot of my students are basically coming to me asking hard questions around access and opportunities. And I do struggle with trying to help them to understand our history around race in America. That's been the stumbling block at a lot of things that we do from an educational practice on campus.
Min,
Oh,
weigh in on this one?
I had to pick one. God, there's just so many. I would like to, you know, as I said before, this bring young people along. Not only that, but also support minority businesses and women-owned businesses. You know, if you have an option of shopping at the mom and pop hardware store or Home Depot, go to the mom and pop hardware store, because the small businesses, the micro businesses, that's what's growing our communities. You know, these small businesses, especially now in COVID, and so many of them are going under and struggling and doing whatever they can to stay open. I think we need to support our mom and pop businesses so that they're not taken over by these huge conglomerates, by the Walmarts and the Home Depot, you know, the Lowe's. So I would really like to see more. I mean, growing up, you went shopping downtown and they were all small businesses that were owned by your neighbors. You know, you knew the people that owned them. And now our cities are dying because our small towns, our small downtown areas are struggling because of the malls. And now with online shopping, they're really struggling, you know, and in the age of COVID, you know, that's a whole different story. So I think we need to support our small businesses, because if a young person can see their neighbor being successful, that gives them the will to want to succeed. And that's what I think we need, kids that really want to succeed, not necessarily go into business, but, you know, become teachers or CEOs, executives, you know, Wall Street, whatever. But know that they can do it if they have a little bit of push. And I think part of that push is being able to actually see someone who is successful in their town.
In the last few minutes, I'm going to ask you one more question. A large part of what's going on today because of COVID is driving us all indoors. And yes, buying things online is one of them. Certainly in Raleigh, North Carolina, where I am, the small businesses are actually doing pretty well. The malls are empty. I don't want to be around 600 people in a mall when I can be around 3 people in a hardware store. But there's been a very big piece, especially down here in the South, of African Americans, mostly Hispanics as well, don't want to wear the mask into a bank. They don't want to wear a mask when really interacting in a small area for reasons that obviously relate right back to racism. So in the 3 areas of the country that you're in right now, what's the biggest change affecting minorities and COVID together? And we have about 10 minutes left, so each of you take 2 or 3 minutes.
Well, I think one of the, you know, just going back to the payroll protection and the way it was done, you know, through your bank. Well, a lot of minority-owned businesses don't have relationships with the larger banks. And when they went for these payroll protection loans, you know, the bank didn't have any money, didn't have the application, didn't know whatever. And so it was supposed to be for small businesses, and yet a lot of minorities didn't get it. You know, and so they're struggling. And I think, I mean, I don't know what can be done about that. John, you're the whistleblower. Perhaps something.
Ma'am, let me say this. Current day, we've got to make sure that there has to be an awareness on things that have to change in this whole environment, because the world is watching. The world is watching us, and we know better. It doesn't mean whether it's Republican or Democrat. Eugene, to answer your question right quick, I think that we have to change the environment about wearing the mask, whether you're a minority or non-minority. I think if there's a one single message with the support of our scientists, we can make a difference. I think that's so important current day. And if the leaders, our leaders, would just support the fact that we need one single message going out there to the masses, we'll be okay. We can overcome this. And I don't care whose side decides to implement this, but it has to be done. And I think that if minorities are holding on to things that happened 80 years ago. We can't do that. We have to make those changes to let them know it's okay if there's a vaccine that's going to prevent the spread of this disease or will kill this disease. When we get there, we've got to make sure we have to quit using old mind thoughts on issues of current day. Mr. Sean, you can take it.
Yeah, no. I don't really have a lot to share with that. I think the intersectionality between COVID and race relations from my world is really about our young people and their protest mode as well as their voice. I think that understanding that they have to wear masks. Some of our folks don't believe that COVID is a reality, or they can get terminally sick or die. So there's some education that has to be dealt with. So when we protest, we get together and there's a number of voices that are heard. We have to make sure that we social distance and that we put a mask on. So for me, it's really more about education and continuing to reinforce the idea that, hey, we don't have all the answers with COVID-19. And then obviously from an overall social justice, social action platform, we need to do it safely. And I think that that's where we are right now on the college campus.
And to get people to wear a mask and social distance, I don't understand how they don't, but I listen to the scientists, and I would hope that others would also. If it's rare that I go into a store, but when I do, I have my mask, I do the social distance. And if someone walks up on me, which they do, I don't know if you've experienced it or not, without a mask, I ask them to back up. And if they don't back up, I leave. Especially when there's signs on the door and the people in charge don't enforce what's on the door.
Okay, I think we need to bring this to a close. First of all, I'd like to thank all three panelists. You did a great job. I'd like to thank Hallie Phillips, who has quietly been keeping us in tune and going along. She's one of the interns for the Sports Philanthropy Network. And most of all, I'd like to thank Roy Kessel and that Philanthropy Network for bringing this to focus. They had a seminar back a few months ago on the topic, and I know that they're going to be keeping it going and keeping that discussion rolling. I'd like to thank the people who attended, and hopefully we can all look to a better future in the very near future. Again, thank you very much. And we're going to end right at 2 o'clock.
Thank you very much for having us.
Thank you very much.
Take care.
Take care now.
Peace.